Hi, welcome to the 10-Minute Book Talk. I'm Catherine Ray, and I'm here with Rachel Linden, Marie Bostwick, and today we are here with Patty Callahan. We are going to talk books for 10 short, sweet minutes, and today we'll talk about Once Upon a Wardrobe. So Patty, I'm going to have you give us a 2-minute quick synopsis of this completely charming story. So what will readers find inside?
I don't know if I can do anything in 2 minutes,
I
but
know.
Here's a go. I don't even know how to say hello in under 2 minutes. The year is 1950.
Mhm.
There's a young boy named George Devonshire who lives in a small stone cottage in the countryside of England. He is ill and he reads all the time. And he is obsessed with a brand new book that burst onto the scene in October of 1950, a book called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And he reads it back to front and front to back and tries to pop out the back of the wardrobe to see if he can enter Narnia. He has a sister named Megs, who is a genius in math and physics and is a student at Oxford University. When his sister comes home for the weekend, he tells her about this book and begs her to find the author, who of course is C.S. Lewis, because he teaches at the university where she attends college, and track him down and ask him, where did Narnia come from?
Okay, such a great question. Okay, so now I have to say, in the back of the book, C.S. Lewis's stepson, Douglas Grisham, tells that you touched upon the deeper magic, and you did. And I believe in all of the deep magic of C.S. Lewis. But after writing about Joy Davidman so beautifully in Becoming Mrs. Lewis, how did you feel dipping more into C.S. Lewis's world?
Yeah.
What'd you find there?
Terrified. Yeah. Terrified, because writing about Joy,
I'd be terrified too.
I was terrified because as much as I know and as much research as I do, I'm not a C.S. Lewis scholar, right? So when I wrote about his wife, yeah, some people literally spend their life studying C.S. Lewis and still don't get to the bottom of it. So for me, I did my research about his wife, Joy Davidman. And in doing the research on his wife, of course, I had to do a lot about him because, they got married, not a spoiler. Right. And I just started seeing all these little seeds in his life that I could see in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So when I had the idea to write the book, or when the idea had me, whatever language you want to use, I knew that I did not want to write from his point of view, that I didn't want to do what I did with Joy, which was write from her point of view. I didn't want to step into the shoes of C.S. Lewis and be like, when I was 8 years old, I didn't want to do that. Yeah. And then, like my pipe. So I understood that I was going to have to find a way around that while still showing you these 7 moments in his life that I could see in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So I did it by circumventing that you never hear him tell Megs the story. He tells Megs the story. She writes it in her notebook. She reads it to George. And we see Lewis's life through the innocent, naive eyes of an 8-year-old boy. Mm-hmm. So that was the only real way I could have done it. I could have never just stood there and written from his point of view.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a question. So Marie and Catherine absolutely loved the book. It was one of our recommendations for December, and actually they both brought it unbeknownst to one another to the recommendation. So
I love it. Thank you. Thank you.
But I'm halfway through. So I'm very concerned about George because I'm only halfway through, but I'm loving it. I'm loving the warmth, and I just think it's so brilliantly executed. But I'm curious, sometimes when we write books, we know the themes going in, and sometimes there are themes that surprised us. So what did you know were going to be themes going in, and what rose to the surface that surprised you?
Wow, that's a great question. So many things surprised me, but the thing that I kind of knew was underneath, let me back up for a second. I'm very enchanted by the origins of stories. Always have been. On Friends in Fiction, I always make sure we ask the question, what was the origin, or where did you get the first idea for it? Where did you kind of have this little, tingly sensation because the idea of where do stories come from is fascinating. And I'm a big mythology geek. I love myths because they're origin stories. And so when I was thinking about Narnia and how it has kind of entered our consciousness, I knew that I wanted to show these very solid events in his life that you could see. But the theme that really rose up out of this was someone like Lewis's ability to take something completely ordinary, like visiting a castle when he was 7 years old, a castle ruin, actually, sitting on the edge of the Irish Sea, looking over these breakers. Half of it had fallen into the sea, that he could take this ordinary thing that he saw as a child, and through the alchemy of story and the deep magic of story, to be honest, he could turn it into Cair Paravel, right? So to take this crumbly thing he saw at 7 years old and that be swimming around in the back of his consciousness or his heart or subconscious or whatever phrase we want to use, and turning it into something extraordinary. And that theme rose up over and over again in the book. And I was planning on being a little bit more logistical, like he studied mythology, so maybe Circe was the White Witch, but it was so much more than that. And so that theme of taking something ordinary through the alchemy of story into something extraordinary didn't surprise me as much as rose up in a bigger way than I had anticipated.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's fabulous.
I have about 47,000 questions, but I'm going to.
We're limiting you to one.
So I'm going to try and contain myself. I know. This is always the problem with this format. I love this book, and it was so hilarious because we don't tell each other our book recommendations before we do our show. And Catherine, I was like, "You took my book." That was what I was doing. We were both reading this. I know. I loved it, and I found it's a delightful story in and of itself. It's so readable, but there's a lot of thoughtful things in here, and I found myself making myself slow down because there's a lot of wisdom, especially in the last half of the book as Meg gets more, she's getting wiser. And I thought, for me, one of the big takeaways was how she becomes convinced of the importance of story and of myth, which of course C.S. Lewis, he talked about he talked about the Bible. He said, it's a myth, but that came true. Right. And I loved that, and how important myth and story and narrative is in our lives. So that's just my commentary. There really is a question in here. So this,
no, and I'm just like nodding. I agree.
So this relationship between Meg and George, it's so interesting to me because George is the younger one, and yet in so many ways he seems the wiser character. She grows, so tell me about how you came up with that idea of the brother and sister relationship, and was that kind of the intent, that in many ways George is sort of the guide in all of this, and yet he's the one asking the questions because he can't really leave?
Yeah, it was intentional, but what wasn't intentional and what really rose up out of, and the three of you know this, when you're writing, you have certain goals and then you're surprised, and then you can go back and strengthen that theme. And I was about halfway through when it really hit me how much George represented imagination and how much Meg's represented logic. And Lewis and Joy actually write a lot about trying to figure out how to not have imagination and logic be so separate. Like, how do you meld those? How do you live a life of logic while allowing imagination to infuse your life? And one of my favorite quotes of Joy's is when she says that she realized that life was too intense to be endured with logic alone. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to echo back to that theme of logic versus imagination. And Lewis says that imagination is the organ of meaning, and that to make meaning of the meaningless or sense of the senseless, we use our imagination and we use story. I'm saying that, he didn't say it, but so I wanted Megs and George to represent that. And then as far as him being wiser, that had a lot to do with the liminal space he is in, meaning he knows that he's closer to an end that Meg is nowhere near. And he's come to accept it in ways that the family and others cannot. And so I wanted to show that wisdom of him, but also how he understands logic, but logic is not going to do him any good right now. And so wanting to bring his sister along to understanding there was more to the world than lists and equations.
Yeah.
Well, you did it so beautifully. And yeah, you had that sense that George is in a hurry, you know.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful book. I adored every word.
Oh, this means a lot to me. Thanks, y'all.
So everybody, this is the book. It is absolutely beautiful. We recommend you go grab it right now. And come April 5th, if you don't already have Patty's other book that's sort of out and about right now, they're all out and about, but Surviving Savannah, it is coming out in paperback on April 5th. So Patty, thank you so much for being with us today. We have loved this, and we will have you back soon because I know there's more bookish news to discuss. So thank you, everybody.
Y'all are amazing. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.